Today I will be talking about vDefend self-service with VCF Automation 9.1. We'll start off with an overview of the demo topology. Then we'll look into the vDefend self-service capabilities for lateral security. We will use those capabilities to create tenant VPC isolation as well as for tenant security policies. Finally, we will conclude with role-based access control, where we will create a custom role for vDefend security administrator persona. Now let's look into the demo topology. In our setup, the provider admin has created a tenant org called Alpha. This is an all apps organization. The tenant admin logs into its organization and creates a VCF automation project called vDefend demo. Inside of this project, there's a VPC for development called vpc-dev with a namespace for web as well as a namespace for database. Each of these namespaces have separate VPC subnets where the VMs for web as well as the VM for database will be hosted. An exact same replication of development is created in VPC production with the name vpc-prod. One of the things that the tenant admin will do is isolate the two VPCs. The tenant admin will also create security policies for an exception, which will allow SSS for Bastion hosts to this environment. On the right-hand side, you can see how this maps into NSX. The NSX project default is where the provider space is, and everything the tenant admin does in this setup is going to be in NSX project Alpha. Now let's look at the setup in VCF Automation on how this maps. Here, the tenant admin has logged into Alpha organization. In the landing page, you can see projects, namespaces, and so forth. Let's click on the project. We can see our project vDefend-demo. The default project is something that the system creates automatically. Let's look into vDefend demo. In this project, there's a tab for namespaces. This is where we can see the namespaces created for both VPC prod and dev. Each has two namespaces. You can also look at the same thing from VPC, where each of the two namespaces associated with the VPCs are shown. Finally, we can go and look at it from NSX VPC topology, where the two VPCs we're using is mapped out, along with the subnet for the database as well as the web servers, and how they are connected to the same transit gateway for this organization. Now let's talk about vDefend self-service capabilities. As you can see, the tenant org admin, once logged in, has access to all things related to vDefend self-service under a single bar firewall. Now let's talk about security profiles. There are 5 system-owned security profiles. These security profiles aligns VPC with a predefined security strategy. Now let's see how we can use the security profiles for VPC isolation. As you can see here, the 5 system security profiles are listed. System security profile 1 with the security strategy none, which means it's wide open, is the default. We can choose any of the other security profiles and make them default by clicking on these 3 dots and clicking on Set as Default. The VPCs that are already created will not change, and for that, we will have to go to one of these security profiles and select them. As the security strategy name indicates, you can see that this is for VPC isolation, the other one is for VPC isolation with essential services, and so forth. Let's change our VPCs to use VPC isolation with essential services, which basically means it will allow all the services like DHCP, DNS that are essential. So you will click on Edit and select those 2 VPCs and click on Save. But I want to show you the before and after. So notice that we need to be in the environment in distributed firewall. So we will go ahead and save this here. And we refresh, and we can see the VPC isolation profile policy, along with the rules associated. So now these two VPCs are isolated. Now let's talk about privilege labels. Privilege labels are a special kind of labels, labels being Kubernetes metadata model to define key value. The privilege labels translate into a read-only NSX tags, and also the privilege labels are RBAC aligned, which means only the users with explicit permissions can use privilege labels. Now let's see how we can use privilege labels on workloads and how they translate into NSX tag. I have deployed a few VMs already. There are 3 VMs in both of the VPCs. Let's pick one from each and see what privilege labels are applied. For the dev web one, if you click on it, there's a section for label, and we'll click on edit to make it easily visible. You can see there's a label and there's a privilege label. For the label, it's a simple key value. The privilege label has a special format, protected / then the key value. I have defined a few privilege labels. One of them is env for environment to indicate that this is in dev. The other one is application for web and so forth. Now let's look at one from the prod VPC. As expected, in this one, the env is prod, indicating it's a production environment, and this one is also web application. Now in NSX inventory tags, we will filter by the scope, and we should see tags dev and prod and the VMs that these are assigned to. So all the dev VMs have this tag, all the prod VMs have this tag. Now let's talk about groups. Groups are for logical aggregation and has been in use in NSX for a while. Today I'm going to showcase how we can use groups with namespace and privilege labels that we saw so far for dynamic membership. Here you can see I have created a few groups. One of them is sgenvdeb, and as expected, if you click on it, you will see those 3 IPs for the 3 VMs in the dev environment. And the membership criteria I'm using here is I'm selecting both of the namespaces, web and DB namespaces, and I'm looking for the value env dev. Similarly, for production, I'm using the same logic, the only thing different being the namespace and the value for the env, where it's prod. In NSX, we can see the same groups we just saw in VCF Automation. We are still in Project Alpha. And in sgenvdev, you see those 3 members. Similarly for sgenvprod, those 3 IP addresses are there. Now let's talk about services. Services is just a read-only listing of all the common services that are predefined in NSX. Now let's talk about distributed firewall. Let's see how we can use distributed firewall using all the constructs that we have seen so far. One of the key things about distributed firewall is that we support both kinds of transit gateways. Both the centralized as well as the distributed transit gateways are supported by distributed firewall. As you can see here, I have created a policy with a rule for Bastion host access to both the dev and prod environment, but limiting that to SSH. Now, once I publish this here in NSX, we can see the new rule and the policy associated. Now let's talk about gateway firewall. The gateway firewall only supports centralized transit gateway. The experience of gateway firewall is very similar to distributed firewall. Now let's see how we can reuse the same security constructs we used for distributed firewall. Here I have created a policy with 2 rules. One is for the dev, another one is for prod, to allow dev access to the GitHub, but blocking access to GitHub from the prod environment. Now let's talk about role-based access control. We will use role-based access control to create custom role with specific rights, and these rights would be related to security administrator role. Here I have created a custom role called security administrator, and this role has 9 view and 9 manage rights. Here are the rights I have given access to, all the firewall rights, all the privilege label rights, grouping to create network security groups, as well as security profile for VPC security profiles. I have also added a user. This one is an LDAP user. I have done an LDAP integration. You can use OIDC or SAML as well. So the LDAP user vDefend demo admin, I have given this user the custom role that we just looked at, security administrator. I have added vDefend demo access to this project. Now let's log out as tenant admin and log back in as the user that we just saw. So LDAP user vDefend demo admin logs in. And as you can see, the user interface is slightly different. There is no administrator tab, and there's only one project listed here. That's because this user only has access to vDefend demo that we explicitly allowed access to. However, if you look under firewall drawer, this user has all the security rights. The services are there, the groups that we looked at earlier, security profiles, and so forth. And this user has full security rights, even though this user is not a tenant admin. This concludes our demo. Thank you.